Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Roanoke Black History kickoff. My name is Carrie Knopf, and I'm very excited to have a great group of people for you all to talk to this afternoon. We're going to get started with reviewing the Virginia Tech Principles of Community. Hassan, are you ready to go ahead and present those to everybody?
Yes, I am. All right, so the Virginia Tech Principles of Community were reaffirmed on September 29th, 2014. I'm just going to read it out loud for everybody here. So Virginia Tech is a public land-grant university committed to teaching and learning, research and outreach to the Commonwealth of Virginia, the nation, and the world community. Learning from the experiences that shaped Virginia Tech as an institution, we acknowledge those aspects of our legacy that reflected bias and exclusion. Therefore, we adopt and practice the following principles as fundamental to our ongoing efforts to increase access and inclusion, and to create a community that nurtures learning and growth for all of its members. We affirm the inherent dignity and value of every person and strive to maintain a climate for work and learning based on mutual respect and understanding. We affirm the right of each person to express thoughts and opinions freely. We encourage open expression with the climate of civility, sensitivity, and mutual respect. We affirm the value of human diversity because it enriches our lives and the university. We acknowledge and respect our differences while affirming our common humanity. We reject all forms of prejudice and discrimination, including those based on age, color, disability, gender identity, gender expression, national origin, political affiliation, race, religion, sexual orientation, and veteran status. We take an individual and collective responsibility for helping to eliminate bias and discrimination, for increasing our own understanding of these issues through education, training, and interaction with others. We pledge our collective commitment to these principles in the spirit of the Virginia Tech motto of ut prosim, that I may serve. I am this year's executive chair for the Roanoke Graduate Student Association, and we have had a very specific and intentional focus on diversity and inclusion, as well as a wide variety of student affairs this semester and this academic year. I can gladly say that this seminar, this project, and the work done by Carrie, Franklin, and all the panelists who will be here today is a fantastic step forward. And I think one that students here especially need to know about our own history here in Roanoke. I think it shines brightly not just on what Roanoke has been able to do, but what hopefully Virginia Tech can do to amplify these voices in the future.
Thank you so much. When I started thinking about what I was going to say to welcome you all today, there was one thing that really stood out to me that I thought was really important to talk about: how the VTC Roanoke team came up with this idea and why we wanted to do it. And the first thing is that it was a team effort. Everybody contributed ideas and everybody put a lot of work and effort into it. So I want to start by thanking all of my team members for their contributions in making today's event a reality. We also were, over the summer, really thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement and the other events of this year, which have had such an impact on all of our lives. And thinking about that also in the scope of wellness and well-being and how we can bring those together in our community. And my background is that I studied architecture and art history at UVA, and then went to graduate school and worked for about 8 years with artists of the African diaspora. And that was something I got into because of a class I took in college, where it was a class from Black history and art and architecture in the American South. And through that class, I really I kind of gained a better understanding of how sometimes what's in the mainstream course isn't always as inclusive or as diverse as it should be. And I mention that because when you guys go on the Roanoke 5K, you're going to have the opportunity to look at images, read stories and history of places here in Roanoke, and go to those places and see them for yourself. And you'll have kind of an opportunity to learn more about a really important place, the place that we all call home. And so I hope that in addition to listening to our panelists, you will all participate in the 5K, because that's why we're here. And they're also going to tell you their stories and tell you what they think you should know about these places. So really quickly, we wanted to add one more thing. The website has all the information about the 5K. So how do you do the 5K? Go onto the website and read about the different places, look at the photos, and then go to the places. Or you can look at the photos and go to the places when you, on your phone, or take the tablet. If you want to win prizes for participating, you can go on our website and fill out a form and submit an image of yourself for the answer to a question. And it will give you, you'll be submitted into a raffle for prizes. And the first 40 participants will, people who submit that they participated will also get a prize. And I'm going to introduce our panelists today. First panelist is Dolly Davis, who is an architect, president and co-founder of Ladies and Gents of the Blue Ridge Transgender Alliance, vice chair for Diversity Camp Incorporated. Our second panelist is Jordan Bell, author at Colors VA Magazine, local historian and community advocate, community program manager at Apple Ridge Farm. Our third panelist is Gloria Mann, therapist at Mann's Counseling Service and a local community advocate. Our fourth panelist is Matthew Chittum. He is the communications and web manager for the Fralin Biomedical Research Institute. He was previously a journalist at the Roanoke Times for 26 years, where he wrote a lot of articles about the history and events in Gainsboro. Fifth panelist is Stephanie Moon, who's currently running for city council and is a former clerk for Roanoke City. And then our last panelist is Reginald Shareef, who is professor of public administration at Radford University for more than 30 years. He also served as an adjunct professor at Virginia Tech Center for Public Administration and Policy, where he taught public management. We have submitted 3 questions for each of our panelists to answer today. The first question is, please describe a piece of history central to the African-American story in Roanoke that's striking or important to you, and how you relate to it. The second question is, considering the answer above, consider your own experiences and how you've impacted history here in Roanoke. Third question is, beyond the axiom of knowing our history, lest we be doomed to repeat it, please tell us your thoughts and ideas on how we can use our new knowledge of our community's history to create impact and end racism now. Our first panelist is going to talk is Dolly. So let Dolly take it away.
Thank you, Carrie. And I just really want to say, first off, I really appreciate being here and having a voice in this discussion about racism and discrimination. I think for me, Roanoke has been a home for 20 years, and how I have seen the problems of LGBTQ and African Americans come together. It's a series of barriers that are double. And what I've seen is homelessness, discrimination. I've seen people struggle getting education, struggle getting employment opportunities. And with all these barriers put in front of the folks, they need extra help. So some of the things I've seen and have tried to address is the discrimination and even the violence that happens behind the scenes, and give a voice to that. Some of these issues are really close to my heart, and we've put them together in several programs, which I can talk about later. But some of those programs that help us address these issues of homelessness, inequality, and discrimination in the diversity of the LGBTQ and African American as they come together. Some of the things I'd like to talk about, how we sort of address this is, I'm president, ladies and gents, of the Blue Ridge Transgender Alliance, and we've been around here for 15 years trying to give a voice to the discriminated folks that don't get a seat at the table, and try to support them in a way that's really meaningful. And a lot of African Americans have it a lot harder. You see in the news that trans lives matter and Black trans lives matter, and they do. And we sit together in sort of segregation from regular society, and we're trying to get a voice to bring that together. In Diversity Camp, as you can see here, this shirt is Diversity Camp. It's one of our programs I'm highly involved in. It's for the youth, and we've been running it for 7 years. And to try to address some of these inequities that exist and allow children to see hope and see others like them, and know that there's access to other things other people have, even if there's barriers. And so these barriers really are at the forefront of what we do, whether it be social events, working with the homeless shelters, doing seminars, reaching out to Carilion for healthcare access, reaching out to some of the local leaders to go ahead and listen, start a conversation that's meaningful. I've worked with Virginia Tech. I was on the board of Multicultural Alumni Advisories board, which had started out as a Black student organization, which then enveloped all the folks. And in doing this, I've met some wonderful people that have some great ideas and great energy. And if we can continue to help and highlight the folks that need representation and bring ideas to the forefront that help everybody, including the African American society and the communities that they have, and the queer LGBT folks and all the intersections that happen between them, that's something I've worked on, and I hope to see more progress in the future on that. So I guess, to finish it up, to give a voice to these marginalized and discriminated folks are really what we're trying to do, whether it's with the overall transgender community, the LGBT even larger, and then even the larger community with my neighbors and my daughters that go to high school here. It's really something that's important to the folks to get a voice, to have people listen, and then maybe to help highlight those voices in a way that's meaningful. And just to close out, this shirt was given to me, and I wore this specifically. The shirt was given to me by a lot of the campers, and they range from elementary school to early high school graduates that don't necessarily have a place. And what we're trying to do is give them a place in a community that they can find support and address some of these inequities and reach out and really make a healthier community for everybody, the larger community, because when everybody succeeds at a small level, the whole community succeeds.
Thank you, Dolly. Our next speaker will be Jordan Bell. Jordan, are you ready?
Yes. Am I speaking to the piece of history that's important to me? Hello?
I think all three questions, Jordan.
Okay, so the piece of history that's important to me, of course, is the entire Gainsboro history and impact of the Gainsboro community and neighborhood that it had on Roanoke. But one specific part of that would be the Clater family. The Clater history to me is a very important piece to the entire city of Roanoke, because it shows resilience. It shows what African Americans were able to accomplish under the most, dire straits and things like that, building a 23-room mansion, a Clater Memorial Clinic, a service station, and producing doctors and Tuskegee airmen and nurses and business leaders. And for that to happen during the time frame that it happened, early 1900s, 1920s, all the way up into the 1960s, is very important to me, because it kind of shows that you can live in your neighborhood, you can work in your neighborhood, you can go to church in your neighborhood, you can do business in your neighborhood, and you don't really have to leave your neighborhood to live a great and decent and productive life. And the Clater family and the Clater history shows us that. An African-American family building a 23-room mansion during the 1920s is absolutely unheard of, especially in the South. And Dr. John Clater was able to do that. And he showed his family and his children how to build more and how to gain, power through, your partnerships and your community-based mind frame. And I think that history is kind of overlooked, because of the way the condition of the building, the Clater Memorial Clinic, looks now. And I think that history is kind of overlooked because of the condition that it is now. So if one piece of history stood out to me, it would definitely be Dr. John B. Clater and his wife, Mrs. Clater, producing 8 children, building a mansion, building a Clater Memorial Clinic, building a service station, and really showing Roanoke what community looks like. So that's a very important piece to me. And then the next question on how I impact history today is simply by telling those stories. It's simply by telling the stories of people who may not be able to have a voice to the larger community or larger city, and remembering those stories, remembering those people, remembering those times, and simply telling those stories that kind of get overlooked, with a lot of the history and the damage that urban renewal caused in that area. So impacting the history to me is simply documenting everything that I hear, documenting everything that I see and learn, and then not only documenting that, but telling everyone that I come into contact with about those stories and seeing what people want to do about it and when we're going to do something about it to kind of right those wrongs. And simply using the knowledge that we learn to kind of change things and make Roanoke a better community, make Southwest Virginia a better place to live, make Virginia a better state to live, country to live. It's simply using your knowledge in a positive way to impact your community directly, and impacting your community directly, indirectly, you impact the larger city, the larger state, the larger country. When you use your knowledge and directly impact the everyday person that you walk in, that you come into contact with every single day, it's simply using the knowledge that you know to build and change your direct community. So to me, that's the way that I use the knowledge that I have now, is simply trying to act on my word, invest in my community, invest in the people that I come into contact with, and showing them, hey, this is how you do it. You change your community first, and then we go on from there. So that's how I use knowledge to change things.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And now, Gloria, are you ready?
Yes. Hi. I am a native Roanoke. I grew up in Roanoke City. My parents were professional and business people. I attended totally segregated schools here. I went to an HBCU. My graduate studies was at a PWI. But having gone to school here in Roanoke at the time that I went to school, I am 72 years old. We were always made to feel that we were good enough and I was somebody. So being a relatively precocious child, can you imagine that? Um, I knew what I wanted to do. And the preparation I received here in our school system never, ever made me feel that I was less than anywhere. I went to Smith College School for Social Work, one of the best schools of social work in the country in Northampton, Massachusetts, and never felt less than because I had grown up in little old Roanoke, Virginia, um, in a segregated setting. So, because of what I received at Addison High School, um, the things that we learned, the clubs and organizations that we had that we were allowed to participate in. We had a fabulous band at the time, and we learned a lot of life lessons from that band director being in that band, punctuality and all those kind of things. So I felt I had a very good foundation here. As a result, when we think in terms of what we can do and what we can give back to, um, I was gone for 18 years, and upon my return, there were some things I saw here that I thought needed to be a little bit different. And I began to join community organizations and trying to make an impact on the community through my college sorority, the organization that produces the debutante ball. It's the longest running activity in Roanoke next to the father-son banquet done by the Y. I think it's about 66 years we have done that. And I decided that I always felt I could do what I wanted to do if I did my research and I had the qualifications. So I chose to run for school board, and I was appointed. And I was chair for 2 of the 5 years I was on the school board. And I did that because I felt this would be an opportunity for me to help other people who may not have been as fortunate as I had been to maneuver the system to be able to help. You don't know how to do this or that, then maybe I could help you get through that maze. It's a system. Like I said, I then became the chair. I was the chair for 2 years, and in reality, I was the first Addisonian that was chairman of the Roanoke City Public School Board. So that made me very proud to do that. And the whole idea to me has been to give back. We were always taught that as children, you give back to where you came from, and that's my Roanoke community. So, like I said, I'm involved with the Al Schwartz Club that does the debutante ball. I'm involved in a lot of community organizations, and I don't know what else that we should be doing other than giving back. But I always feel good about me being from Roanoke. I grew up in Northeast, and my family did not move to Northwest until I was about 12 years old. So we moved before the major redevelopment occurred down there. And the best part about it, during the 50s, when they came through and they did start doing all these things, we were able to roller skate from Williamson Road all the way over to Hotel Roanoke without having to go through any curbs or anything. And that was a fun thing. We didn't know the major impact of what was going on, the houses being demolished and all that. But I have felt that I can contribute, and you give back, and you give back not just on the local level. Like I said, I was the first African American to be chair of the Addisonian, and then I came back and I was the first African American to open a full-time counselor, female to open a full-time counseling business as a licensed clinical social worker. And when we do these things and we tell young people these things, is that if I can do it, just a regular little old Gloria Mans, anybody else can do that. And so we have to just think in terms of giving back to our community. I was appointed 4 years ago, to be on the Board of Social Work for the state of Virginia. Again, I'm giving back. I'm letting people in Southwest Virginia who many times don't have representation. But I think I got a lot of that from that I could do whatever I wanted to do if I put my mind to it and worked hard enough for it and had the credentials to do it. So That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Gloria. Our next speaker is Matt. Matt, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm honored to be among these panelists, pretty much all of whom I know from my former life as a journalist. Small bit of trivia. I'm obviously a white guy. I did not grow up in Gainsboro. I am, however, a Roanoke native. My Lebanese great-grandfather came here from Zahle, Lebanon in 1896. And about a month after arriving at Ellis Island, he bought a piece of property in Gainsboro in Roanoke, Virginia. The Lebanese immigrants were part of the fabric of that community for decades. How I relate to the history of Gainsboro and Black history generally in Roanoke is I grew up here, aware of how segregated our city is, and then I spent more than 2 decades as a storyteller for the Roanoke Times, and it just became a personal passion to tell these stories from the Gainsboro community and the Black community at large. I left the paper in April, and one of the things I was working on at the time, and the one story I left behind there that really haunts me, is the story of Old Lick Cemetery. There's part of Old Lick Cemetery is still there on Orange Avenue, right across from the Civic Center. That's roughly about half of it. The other half of it is where the I-581 interchange is. In the early 60s, that cemetery, which had been closed for a few decades at that point, was, well, about half of it was uprooted. The city removed 933 graves from that site. Out of those 933, according to city documentation, there were markers, legible markers on only 28 of them. Of those 28, one literally said unknown, a few more were illegible. Most of those folks were anonymous, and at that point, and they were moved to a mass grave in Botetourt County in what was then the city's Potter's Field. It's Pauper's Field for indigent burials. That story just strikes me as a microcosm of how Black people in Roanoke have often been treated in this community, which is as though they were mostly just in the way and subject to being moved at the whim of white people in power. And I look back at the whole of our history, some of which has already been alluded to here wonderfully. It was, Roanoke had a Black community that was beyond self-sufficient. It was building wealth. It was caring for itself. It was economically diverse. The Black neighborhoods in Roanoke were mixed economically, where working class folks lived on the same streets as doctors, lawyers, and their teachers and principals. All of that was leveled through urban renewal, which if you don't know, urban renewal is a federal policy that Roanoke and a lot of other cities, not just in the South, took advantage of, which allowed them to declare neighborhood blighted and use eminent domain to seize the property and redevelop it. So if you're familiar with Roanoke at all, if you think about where the interstate is near downtown, where the Berglund Center is, which most of us still call the Roanoke Civic Center, and the business district that's across Williamson Road, that was all residential. That's where Gloria was just talking about roller skating. I think about 1,600 buildings were leveled as part of urban renewal in Roanoke. 200 businesses were plowed under, put out of business. I've lost track of the number of churches and schools. But all of that was literally plowed under. You compare that to today, we remain a highly segregated city, though I see some signs of that changing. There's a disturbing overlap between being Black and in poverty in Roanoke. And so I want to know how we got here. And I want to know about Roanoke's peculiar racial past, from this vile lynching in 1893, where a Black man accused of assaulting a white woman was not only torn from the jail and hung. His body was defiled. And the mayor who tried to stop them was run out of town for his own safety for 2 weeks. In the 19-teens, city council codified black and white neighborhoods in the city. Roanoke was one of only a handful of neighborhoods in Roanoke to a handful of cities in the US to try that. It was ultimately struck down by the Supreme Court. When Roanoke did integrate, it was under the auspices of a biracial committee to integrate businesses and institutions. There weren't a great number of civil rights marches here, like you think of in the South during the civil rights era. Rather, things were done peacefully and with cooperation from white leaders who were probably mostly racist, but saw practical reasons for integrating. Resistance to integrating schools. Brown versus Board of Ed happened in 1954. I went to kindergarten at Grand Accord Elementary in 1971, and that was the first year that school had black kids in it. And then, of course, urban renewal. I'll try to be brief for the rest here. How have I impacted history? I think I've been impacted by Roanoke's Black history more than I've impacted it. What I've tried to do as a journalist is essentially what this panel is doing, which is to get these stories in front of more people so we understand how we got here and why Black people and Black Roanokers in particular feel as they do, to eliminate ignorance as an excuse. What can we do? I think the way Roanoke continues to suffer from its residential segregation is that if you're white like me, you can probably live most of your life all day long without having to go through a Black neighborhood. If you're experiencing Black people at all, it's going to be probably through your workplace or through your child's school. Exposure is, whether it's to history or just to each other, that's a first step in addressing inequality and justice. We need to live among each other. Yes, that's a hard lift after centuries of pressure and reluctance. But it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to understand how your neighbors have lived, how the injustices they've suffered, the successes they've had, and therefore why they might have a different perspective on today than you do.
Thank you so much, Matt. Next, we are going to hear from Stephanie Moon. Stephanie, can you unmute yourself, please?
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for allowing me to be on the panel with some outstanding people. I was honored to have been asked. Excuse me. I have a story just like Gloria and Matt. Feel a little dry, excuse me. And I stayed up last night writing down a lot of things, but listening to Matt and listening to Gloria, as Reggie said, I would be all right. I grew up here. I guess I'm a native. I moved here when I was 1. So I think that makes me a native. My parents moved here from West Virginia, McDowell County, along with my uncle, and we lived in Southwest, inner city Southwest is what I call it. My world consisted of 2 streets, Salem Avenue and Roy Avenue, 12th to 18th Street, roller skating, bike riding, and playing with your childhood friends. I relate more to the history my relationship with the history would be Herc Park. Herc Park Elementary School was across the street. The address was 1525. It was an 8-room building with a multipurpose room and administrative office. I had the gentleman, I looked him up to see where did Herc Park get its name. And it was Wilford Julius Hurt. He was a young man who went off to World War II. He died. He went into the service, I think he was 20. He died when he was 23. He lived in Gainsboro on Patton Avenue. The home is no longer there. I was hoping it would be, but it was demolished. And I relate to Hurt Park. As I said, I grew up there. My address was 1526. So it was just a rock throw away. And I was really impacted by 3 teachers who taught me at Hurt Park. My first grade teacher, Fralin. She had a way with us. She was always challenging the students. She would always ask us, who do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was always the same. I wanted to be like her. She was kind, she was sweet, she was always smiling. And I told her she had pretty teeth and she had pretty legs. And she thought that was very complimentary, but that was my answer every time. And so from her, I learned to dream and have vision. My second grade teacher was Alpha Dow. She taught me the importance of learning to read. She said it was always important when you read something to enunciate, to look, stand up straight. And so she would always have the class stand up and read aloud and read out. And again, make sure you were looking straight at your audience and enunciating. So she taught me, perhaps I would have to say, confidence in oneself. And then there was Mary Hackley, my third grade teacher. Miss Hackley is very special to me. At the age of 9, my parents went through a divorce. And as a child, that was very fearful for me and trying to figure out what would happen. I have 4 siblings. And so I would go to school oftentimes in the latter part of my 3rd grade crying. And she would have to take time out most days and kind of console me before we could get on with the lesson plan. So I really respected her for that, for taking the time and showing compassion. So I learned compassion from Miss Hackley, and taking all of that and relating it to leaving Southwest. I left Southwest as a teenager, moved into Northwest. We moved into public housing on Hunt Avenue. But before I left Southwest, changes took place. The homes that I was used to going to that we thought were nice, they were family homes. They had 2-parent families. Up in Upper Southwest at the 1700 block, Roanoke redevelopment came through, tore down all the houses, whether city or the state, whichever, and they put in public housing. And most of the families that moved there, I suppose, came from Northeast. So we were learning to make new friends. And then in 71, like I said, I moved into another public housing. We were on welfare, public assistance. I moved to Northwest, went to Monroe. And at that time, I went to Monroe, it was integrated. I was not integrated until I entered the 8th grade. Living in West Virginia in the holler, we had whites around us. We all went to school together. So I did not know that there was a difference in getting along with another race. We also had in Southwest, as Matt mentioned, Lebanese. Our grocery stores, as we saw as grocery stores, were Lebanese. They lived on Patterson. Miss Weeby, the Weebies were there. So we played with their kids. So again, I did not know much about being disrespected. I went on from there and I was blessed to get a job with the city. I went to the city clerk's office in 1978. I was the first African-American to be hired in there that stayed to move up through the ranks. And in 2000, I was appointed the deputy city clerk. And then in 2006, I was acting city clerk and became city clerk in 2007. And I was the first African-American clerk in Southwest, not only in Roanoke, but the entire Southwest region. And I became very active in my organization and in my profession because I wanted the other localities to see Black and to hire Black. And I was successful with that. And I'm known, even in fact, through the 50 states because I got active on the international board, which also had international clerks. So I was also known in the international level too. So I've had some, I think I've had a pretty good career. It ran 42 years. I worked for 5 different mayors. And so I had various council members. I worked for a city clerk who was well respected. And, but I have to truly say, I did feel that I was not as respected as Mary Parker, being the clerk. Having came up in her office, I saw how people treated Mary with the uttermost respect. And I truly was naive enough to believe that that was going to happen to me. Sometimes it did, and most times it didn't. And I had to accept that I was not there to be rated on my skin color. I was there to do a job. Public-wise, the public did treat me well. They gave me the utmost respect from all walks of life, poor and rich, middle class, what have you. Because I would always say, and I taught my kids as well as my staff, we treat everyone alike. We do not look at color. That anyone that walks in here in a suit, the person who has tattered clothes on gets the same treatment. That you do not downplay one person over another. And that held true the entire time I was the clerk. And I think that was part of my success as the clerk. And leaving there, I retired in December, and I decided that more work needed to be done, as it has been stated. And I felt that with my background coming from where I have and knowing what I know about Roanoke, that I could truly be that asset and be that voice to help bring about that change. And I think looking over what I can bring to the community with regards to the end of racism, I think we need to, at least for me, I believe in meeting people where they are, even going down to their level with no disrespect, being respectful, never trying to talk down to anyone, treat them all with the uttermost respect. I also have believed that we should love our neighbors as ourselves. I think that makes a community. Where I reside is a mixed bag. We have Pakistanis, India, Black, white, Hispanics, a nice community. And I'm thankful that I've been over here for 15 years. When discussing racism, I think we need to really focus on the main thing and not what the actions are. And be sure to look at the ground rules that you set and include the main rule should be to agree to disagree, be honest, and be real. I'm a real person. I believe in letting you know where I stand, and I don't change, I don't compromise. I don't think you should compromise your beliefs. I don't think you should attack one another. Again, I think you need to stay focused. I think you need to be willing to seek to understand instead of always trying to be understood. Think about the end result, what you're trying to have the outcome to be. The truth is colorless. When we are discussing the reality of issues that are negatively impacting our communities, we need to talk in terms of the behaviors, irrespective of race, nationality, of the person who is creating the turmoil or the chaos. Let us not be accused of racial profiling. I think we, African Americans, Blacks, whatever we want to be called between ourselves, I think we as a race need to learn how to address each other, mainly with respect. We are known to be our worst enemies, and that's my opinion. Remember, respect is earned. It is not demanded. We need to ask the question, is it me? Am I helping or hindering the change, whatever that change might be? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. All right, Reggie, are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Thank you.
Okay. The piece of history that is my point of reference is the 1960s desegregation of Roanoke's businesses and mentioned earlier. This desegregation took place without protest and violence. Other southern cities like Greensboro, Nashville, Danville, Virginia, Birmingham all had very violent clashes in the 1960s and thereafter in their efforts to desegregate. I was 9 years old in 1960 and fascinated by this smooth transition from segregation to desegregation. So why was racial desegregation so unique in Roanoke? There was a biracial panel of 6 Black members and 6 white leaders who met secretly to facilitate this transition. And one of these men was Dr. Maynard Law. And when he died in May of 1999, the General Assembly noted his efforts as a member of this biracial panel. And I want to read just a portion of the resolution from the Virginia General Assembly. Whereas during the early years of the civil rights struggle, Dr. Law was one of 6 African-American Roanoke citizens who joined a biracial committee determined to desegregate Roanoke businesses while avoiding the protests and violence that plagued other southern cities during the 1960s. And whereas due largely to the efforts of Dr. Law and his compatriots, Roanoke's lunch counters, department stores, theaters, and other businesses were desegregated peacefully. And whereas Dr. Law was an integral part of the group that, in the words of former Mayor Noel C. Taylor, brought growth, development, and progress without confrontation to the Roanoke Valley. And so that's really important because it reflects the social and political culture of Roanoke. And so while I relate to these secret meetings, as an academic who has spent the past 40 years studying leadership and organizational change, I've always been interested in these types of power-sharing relationships between 2 groups of stakeholders who want a particular socio-economic outcome, but cannot achieve the desired outcome without each side conceding power to the other. Dr. Law and the other Black leaders knew that Roanoke's white leaders did not want negative media attention on Roanoke because even then they were trying to attract business to the city. So the Black leaders' leverage in negotiations with these white leaders was that to avoid sit-ins and confrontations, the leaders had to use their socio-economic influence on those who opposed desegregation to be non-confrontational. The white leaders agreed. Likewise, the white leaders knew that Black leaders wanted desegregation, but that the process had to proceed at a slower pace to gain broader social acceptance than Black leaders wanted. These leaders also agreed to those terms. So each side compromised. And one of the reasons that Matt says that school desegregation was slow here was because that was the demand of the white leaders. The Black leaders said we weren't going to have any protests or sit-ins and bring negative media attention to the Roanoke, to Roanoke, and that was what the white leaders want. In economics, this is called exchange theory, and in leadership, it's called informal co-optation. And just as an addendum, I want you to note that these types of power sharing arrangements don't just exist in Roanoke, but nationally as well. In 2017, I wrote a book chapter on how President Obama used the same informal leadership framework in discussions with the 5 major healthcare carriers in the design of the Affordable Care Act. And more recently, the NBA players who boycotted the playoffs after the shooting of the young Black man in Wisconsin wanted the NBA to give greater tangible support to Black Lives Matter. The NBA owners wanted the playoffs to continue. The power sharing arrangement, 20 NBA owners would open their arenas up for early and same-day voting in key battleground states for the November election in exchange for the NBA playoffs continuing. The names of those arenas were named last week. Considering the above, how have your experiences impacted history in Roanoke? I later learned that what happened in the 1960s biracial committee to desegregate Roanoke reflects a certain set of dominant social, political, and cultural values in Roanoke City. These dominant cultural values remain the same today. 1, all stakeholders have power. 2, all stakeholders must lead the change process viewed as winners. 3, all substantive negotiations must be done privately, not in public. And 4, media coverage of the change process must be favorable. And here's an example. I've done several projects with Fralin over the past 25 years. And most were done private between Haywood and I, negotiating and working out agreements. I'll talk about one very briefly. In 2000, when the Higher Ed Center opened in the old N&W office building, Haywood called me and said he wanted a HBCU to have a presence and offer classes through the new facility. He asked if I had any suggestions. Since I had attended Virginia State University in Petersburg as an undergraduate, I suggested contacting the president of that university. He called, but nobody called back. They would call me a second time, and I told him to contact Hampton University and that their president also owned a Pepsi distributorship. He called President Harvey at Hampton. Harvey called him back, and thus Hampton University was the first historically Black college and university to offer classes through the Roanoke Higher Ed Center. It's the first time I really ever told that story publicly. It was just this background. I had another example from Haywood that I mentioned that he and I did, but when Jordan and Matt were talking about eminent domain, I scribbled in my notes here that I was the Claytor family's eminent domain expert witness in their landmark and successful suit against the city of Roanoke in 2003. But the challenge, against the Roanoke Redevelopment and Housing Authority. The Claytor property that Jordan referenced had been under condemnation status for 23 years. This is the longest condemnation status in history. And the Housing Authority claimed that they could hold property in perpetuity, in condemnation status in perpetuity. And there were 5 U.S. Supreme Court rulings that said that inverse takings like that were unconstitutional. They violated the property owner's 5th and 14th Amendment constitutional rights. So we went to court. I was his expert witness. We sort of looked like David and Goliath going in against Woods Rogers, but we won. We had the law on our side. And not only did the Claytor family win the case, win monetary damages, but that ruling helped change the law in the Virginia General Assembly. How can we use our new knowledge of community, of our community's history to impact ending racism now? I think first we have to clearly define racism. The straightforward meaning of the word is the belief in the innate superiority of one group over another group. That is, by definition, believed to be innately inferior. This socio-political ideology has been the basis for American racism and is deeply embedded in our national culture. I would like to narrow this broad macro question down to a micro issue of employment discrimination. And then when we do that, we have to further distinguish between group discrimination in employment and individual discrimination in employment. When an ethnic group is viewed as a low-performing group, although certain individuals in the group may be high performer, the perception of group racial inferiority persists. It is 1899, not 1999. In his 1899 book, The Philadelphia Negro, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the first Black to earn a PhD in sociology from Harvard, wrote the following: the individual Black workman is not rated by his own efficiency, but by the efficiency of the whole group of Black workmen, which often may be low. If white people were to lose their racial prejudices overnight, that would make very little difference in the economic condition of Blacks. Du Bois established this causal relationship between group performance and racism. So I'm a big fan of the Harvard economist Raj Chetty and his large-scale research on upward social mobility in the United States. And Chetty has made several recommendations that I think fits into our discussion today. The first is the states of the old Confederacy, including Virginia, are the worst geographical areas in the country.
Hey, Reggie, I'm afraid I'm going to need to cut you off because we are going to run out of time. We've only got about 6 minutes left.
Okay, all right.
Do you mind if because we've gotten some great questions from the audience. And so Franklin Edwards, who is a member of the Roanoke Graduate Student Association at Virginia Tech, is going to be facilitating the Q&A discussion. So I'm going to hand it over to Frankie.
All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, as Carrie said, we're going to move to our Q&A portion of the event. So we will address as many questions as we can with the remainder of our time. But also panelists, when answering the question, can you please repeat the question and then share your thoughts? So our first question, directed to any of you really, if you all want to share, is can you each tell us about your vision for the future of Roanoke? And this person says, I think sometimes helping people see a better future is a big part of the battle. I know it seems obvious, but I really think it is key to helping people create the integrated future we all want. So feel free to start, anybody that would like to share.
I'll share with that question about basically how Roanoke can become a better community. And Dr. Shareef could speak to this better than I can about the gentleman that he was speaking about, Raj Chetty. He taught me about him a couple of weeks ago, but the upward social mobility aspect of it is the city of Roanoke has to figure out how to better impact in a positive way the ability for people to have better upward social mobility in the city of Roanoke. And that to me is investment into the communities, investment in the schools, neighborhoods, businesses, and things like that. But we have to figure out as a city, as a community, to impact the upward social mobility of everyone in our city in a positive way. And again, Dr. Shareef could speak to that better than I can, but the upward social mobility aspect of it really impacts me when I think of how to make Roanoke a better city and a better community.
Yeah, Joe, and I'll just briefly dovetail on that. So Chetty has a number of policy recommendations, but they also include these joint ventures and power sharing arrangements. And one is to have kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds interact with people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds to better understand opportunities, how to navigate the system, etc. Early pre-K education boosts later outcomes. A college education acts as a great equalizer. However, chances of going to college are strongly correlated with family income, so there needs to be more student aid. And finally, since we're talking about, we're doing this for the Fralin Biomedical Center in Virginia Tech, being poor has implications for higher mortality rates. So any type of outreach from the medical school or the Fralin Center to improve quality of life and health issues begins to impact what Jordan is referencing as upward social mobility. Thank you.
I would add to that, and this may have been Chetty may have been involved in this study. We attempted to write a series about generational poverty in Roanoke when I was still at the paper, and it was just too much of a lift. But the basis for that was a Harvard study of a cohort of kids, following them over 20 years to analyze economic mobility. The New York Times did a somewhat flawed shakeout of that data, but it still made the point that essentially, if you were a child born into poverty in Roanoke, you could move almost anywhere in America, and just by moving, improve your chances. Intergenerational poverty across races is a deeply rooted problem here. The raw data from that study found that Roanoke excels in some poor ways. Economic segregation in this city is dramatic, like 95th percentile in the country. Single mother households, we are in the 97th percentile in the country for single mother households. Residential segregation, again, very high. Part of some reporting on that, I was focused on Lansdowne, which that's an old public housing development in Roanoke. It was built in 1951. It was built as white public housing. It is now 85% Black. I think about 90% of the households there are single mother households if it's a full household and not for example, a single older person living there. This is a couple years old, but median income there for a household of three was about $5,300. That's for a year. There's a lot this city could do to quote the cliche, have a rising tide that lifts all boats.
Yeah, Matt, that was the Chetty study.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys for answering those questions. We are at the top of the hour, so I do want to be respectful of all the attendees' time and our panelists' time. So I'm afraid we might have to end our discussion panel now. And that's unfortunate because there are so many great questions and you guys provided so much great history. So we really appreciate that. But for all of our attendees, just know that you can learn more if you sign up for our self-guided 5K tour, which is starting today. So, go to the FBRI, the Fralin Biomedical Research Institute Community Outreach and Events page, and you can find the sign up under the events information. And this will run until October 15th. But I did just want to say a sincere thank you to Jordan Bell, Matt Chittum, Dolly Davis, Gloria Manns, Stephanie Moon, and Reggie Shareef for sharing their stories with us today and answering our questions. Also, thank you to the wellness team and communications team for putting this event together and getting the message out about this event. And lastly, thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.